Well, as I'm recording this in mid-April, there is every indication that racing is going to be back this fall, crossing my fingers, especially marathons. There's been 5Ks, depending upon where you are in the country, maybe even up to the half marathon, but marathons have been pretty scarce. But right now it looks like Boston, Chicago, New York, London, and dozens of other marathons are going to be taking place this fall. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls in marathon training. So I'm going to talk about ways to sabotage your marathon training. Obviously, what you want to do is not do those things. That's the idea. But it reminds me of a phrase that I heard once that I think is very applicable. It says, anyone can run a marathon if you can survive the training. Because a lot of people end up getting beat down during the training and maybe don't make it to the start line or make it to the start line injured. And your number one goal is to try and get to the start line healthy. That really supersedes everything else. I personally love marathon training. Other people find it a grind, but you can run a marathon. You can survive the training. So let's talk about some of the mistakes that I see people making that you, of course, will not make. One is they don't give themselves enough time to train. What happens is a race way off this fall just seems like it's an eternity away, but you need a fair amount of time to train for a marathon. How much time do you need? Here's some really generic guidelines. It's very individual. But if you've got a minimal base, if you've not been doing a lot of running lately, got a minimal base, you probably want at least 20 to 22 weeks to train for a marathon. If you've got a good base, you've been running a fair amount, you've been doing a little bit of speed work, some tempo work, got a good base established, you can maybe get by with 16 to 18 weeks. But a lot of people are going to be more like the 20 to 22. So the way I always recommend you do this for a marathon in particular, and really any race, is work backwards. And by work backwards, I mean look at the date of the race and start counting back to see, well, when would training need to start? Because invariably, it's sooner than you would think. I'll use an example. The Chicago Marathon is on October 10th this year. If you need 22 weeks, that means your training starts May 10th, or as I'm recording this, in just about 3 weeks, it's time to start training for a marathon, but it seems so far out. Now, if you've got that really good base, you start more like early June, but even early June is kind of just around the corner. So identify your marathon, work backwards. More time is always better because marathons just appreciate having a lot of time. Now, the next way that you could sabotage your marathon, besides not giving enough time, is run your long runs too fast. This is probably the number one mistake I see people making when they're training for a marathon, is they do their long runs too fast. They're deathly afraid if they don't run faster on long runs, they're not going to be able to have a good marathon. Now, if you're an experienced marathoner, you will probably have some long runs that are done a little bit faster. If you're a very new marathoner, you might not have any. But even the experienced marathoner, a lot of your long runs are just really easy runs, and people run them too fast. I used to work with a large training group that would train for Chicago Marathon, was one of the events they might train for, and I would be running with them on a long run, and somebody go, so you can see this is really an easy pace for me. I can run this all day. No, they can't. They're huffing and puffing. That's way too hard. It should be very conversational. The purpose of the long run is not to teach you to run fast. You're building aerobic endurance. You're building muscular endurance. Your long runs, most people just run their long runs, their easy runs, too fast. Big mistake. Don't run too fast. Next, probably the second most common thing, try and lose weight. I can't tell you how often somebody tells me, yeah, I'm training for a marathon and maybe I can drop those last 5 pounds or those last 10 pounds. Nothing against some weight loss if you want to have it. Trying to do it during a marathon is a bad idea. Most people end up under fueling when they're training for a marathon because you're doing a lot more work and that takes energy. And what happens is your body's starving, your workouts start to suffer because you're not well fueled, and then one day, Katie bar the doors, you clean out the refrigerator and plow through 10,000 calories and end up not losing any weight anyway. So weight loss is fine. Don't do it during marathon training. You may end up losing some weight, but I would never make that the goal. Your goal should be to make sure that you are well fueled for all your workouts, because marathons take a lot of energy and you're going to need that fuel in your body. Next thing you could do, skip the strength work. I mean, who's got time for that? You don't need that strength work. Well, chances are you do, and I'm going to talk about 3 things in particular: your glutes, your core, and your shoulder. So your glutes, your butt muscles, the strongest muscles in the body, they are what should be driving your legs predominantly. You're going to use some other muscles, but they're the big ones. Many times our glutes are not strong and they're not active. So they have to be strong and active. So do a search on YouTube. You can find all kinds of videos called glute activation. I would spend a couple minutes before every run activating your glutes. They're more likely then to be engaged when you're running. But you've got to do the strength work on your glutes. You've got to keep them strong. The glutes are what help keeps your legs stable. And otherwise, your knee is going to tend to cave in. And what's going to happen is you're going to get into the depths of marathon training, and chances are your knee is going to start bothering you, or your hamstring's going to start bothering you because the hamstrings are doing too much of the work rather than let the glutes doing it. And all of a sudden, you're taking some time off from your training because you haven't got that right strength in there. So you've got to take care of your glutes. You've also got to be doing some core work. Core, think from knees to breast, but it's crunches. I'm not suggesting that crunches are what you go out and do, but you want to have that strong core. Why is that important? Watch people towards the end of a marathon, and invariably you'll see them bending over. And that's terrible running form. It makes it less efficient to run. It takes more energy to run. You got to maintain that navel drawn back to your spine and running tall all the way through like you look at with the elites. And a strong core is going to help you do that. And then finally, you want some shoulder work in there. I did the math once. I don't know what it is. It's like 45,000 times you're going to be turning your shoulders when you're doing a marathon. So you want to have some shoulder work. So don't skip the strength work. It's very important. And as much as I like miles during a marathon training, if time is really the issue, then you need to run less and do the strength work, because the big thing is you've got to be consistent, and otherwise you're likely to get injured. You're going to take time off, and there goes your consistency. Now, the other thing you can do is skip the foam rolling. You don't need the foam rolling. Now, besides foam rolling, nowadays we have massage guns, we have other things, but generally speaking, you need to do that, especially in the areas on your quads and around the IT bands and your butt and piriformis, to keep those so that they're loose and flowing smoothly. You don't actually roll the IT bands. People talk about I'm rolling my IT bands. Actually, the IT bands are fibrous. You can't really roll them. You're rolling the muscles around them to keep them limber. But with strong glutes and doing some foam rolling, probably 5 times a week for most people, is going to help keep those legs moving smoothly. So again, you reduce your risk of injury and can train consistently. And then the final thing that you can do is be a weekend warrior. And by weekend warrior, I mean that marathons love miles. I'm a pretty big fan of trying to do as high a mileage as you can to a certain extent. But sometimes people will cram that all into Saturday and Sunday. And what they do is they end up running 70 or 80% of all their miles on 2 days, and then not so much during the week. I understand busy schedules, you do what you can do, but what happens when you do that is you end up really being tired after that weekend. Your runs aren't as effective during the week, and then you come back and you just pound yourself again. So I think most people are predominantly going to have a lot of miles on the weekend because that's when most of the long runs are. But try and get a longer run during the week if you can, even if it means you got to get up extra early to try and get 10 miles on a Wednesday or whatever that might be. But trying to not cram all your miles into the weekend is going to help you. Now, there are, of course, dozens and dozens of other things, but in my experience, those are some of the things that people end up doing that sort of sabotage their marathon. But the good news is for you is now you know, and you can not do those things.